August 1718, the Caribbean Sea. A pirate crewman wakes in a hammock 28 inches wide, opens his mouth, and a tooth falls into his palm. He has been at sea for 6 months. His gums are black. Old scars on his legs have split open overnight. And he is one of the lucky ones, because in 1718, the average Golden Age pirate survived less than 2 years from the day he raised a black flag. Most didn't make it through one. 10 months earlier, this man had stood on a dock in Nassau with a choice: sign the articles or starve on land. He had signed. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't desperate. Well, most of them were. But he had joined a crew that let him vote on every decision, split every prize equally, and guaranteed him 600 pieces of 8 if he lost a leg. Pirates had invented workers' compensation 170 years before the British Parliament would. But none of it could save him, because the thing that killed most pirates wasn't a cannonball, a cutlass, or a hangman's noose. It was the year itself. The War of the Spanish Succession had just ended. Thousands of trained sailors were dumped onto the labor market with no work, no pension, and no future. The merchant captains who would hire them paid starvation wages, flogged them for minor offenses, and offered nothing when they were injured. A sailor who lost an arm aboard a merchant vessel got a handshake and a dock to beg on. But a pirate ship was different. Captains were elected, pay was split by vote, shifts were shorter, and if you lost a right arm in battle, the crew owed you 800 pieces of 8, written in ink, signed before the ship left port. A left leg, 500, an eye, 100. It was the first disability insurance system in the English-speaking world. By 1718, 1,000 pirates operated out of Nassau in the Bahamas. They had built something no one expected, a republic. The harbor was too shallow for Royal Navy warships. The code was enforced by vote. For a brief window, it was the freest settlement in the Western Hemisphere. But the window was already closing. In September 1717, King George I had signed a proclamation, the King's Pardon. Any pirate who surrendered within 1 year would be forgiven for every crime he had ever committed. And a man named Woodes Rogers was already crossing the Atlantic with 7 warships to deliver it. Most pirates didn't know it yet. They were worried about the wrong threat, because long before the Royal Navy arrived, the ship itself was trying to kill them. Below the waterline, creatures called shipworms were boring through the hull. They turned solid oak into honeycomb, a floating coffin that leaked constantly and could break apart under the stress of a single storm. Barnacles dragged on the hull and stole up to 40% of the ship's speed. A pirate ship that couldn't outrun a naval frigate was already dead. The only fix was careening, beaching the ship at high tide, tipping it on its side, and scraping the hull clean with torches and hand tools. But careening took days. The crew was defenseless, and every pirate hunter in the Caribbean knew it. March 1718, 3 months out. The last chicken has been killed. The fresh food is gone. Livestock was loaded at port. Chickens for eggs, goats for milk, pigs for slaughter. Fresh fruit rotted within days in the tropical heat. The animals were eaten one by one. By month 2, nothing remained but what could survive in a barrel. The staple was hardtack, a cracker made from flour, water, and salt, baked until it was hard enough to crack a tooth. That dryness was the point. Without moisture, mold couldn't grow, and the biscuit could last for years. But after weeks at sea, weevils burrowed into every piece. Sailors learned to eat in the dark so they wouldn't see what they were chewing. Beside the hardtack sat barrels of salted beef and pork. meat so saturated with brine that it needed hours of soaking before it could be cooked. Even then, it was tough, grey, and nothing like fresh food. One sailor from the period described his provisions bluntly. His biscuit was crawling with worms, and the beef so salty that a man could thirst for a full day after eating it. But eating wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. Cooking happened on a small iron stove called a caboose, mounted on the open deck and only in calm seas. A single spark in the wrong direction could reach the gunpowder magazine and turn the ship into a fireball. Every crew member knew it. During storms, the stove was extinguished, and the crew ate cold hardtack and raw salt pork straight from the barrel, crouched in the dark, soaked, chewing blind, waiting for the wind to stop. But when a pirate crew captured a merchant ship, everything changed. For a day, fine wines, cheese, exotic spices, fresh citrus. Those raids weren't just about profit. They were the only reason some of these men were still alive. But the food they ate every other day, the salt pork, the hardtack, the dried peas boiled into grey porridge, had a problem no one understood. It kept their stomachs full, but it was stripping something from their bodies that they could not survive without, and not one of them knew it was happening. May 1718. 5 months at sea. The water smells like the inside of a coffin. Water was stored in oak casks stacked in the hold. Within weeks, the wood leached tannins into the liquid. Algae bloomed. Bacteria multiplied. The water turned green, then brown, and began to stink. Sailors called it live water, and the name was accurate. The barrels were alive with things that could kill a man, but pirates couldn't simply dock and refill. Known pirate crews were shot on sight at Royal Navy outposts. The ports willing to trade charged enormous prices. A barrel of clean water could cost more than a barrel of rum. So captains kept charts of hidden freshwater springs on unnamed islands and guarded those charts more carefully than any treasure map. Some crews tracked the flight patterns of birds to find rivers they had never seen before. When it rained, the crew spread sailcloth across the deck and funneled every drop into the casks. But Caribbean rain was unpredictable. It could pour for 3 days straight and then vanish for a month. And when the springs were dry and the rain didn't come, there was only one option left. They mixed what remained in the barrels, green, stinking, thick with sediment, with rum. The alcohol killed some of the bacteria. It masked the taste enough to swallow. This mixture became known as grog. It wasn't a celebration drink, it was a survival tool. And the cruelest fact of all, they were surrounded by water in every direction. But drinking seawater triggers a cascade that ends in hallucinations, seizures, and death. The salt forces your body to flush more fluid than it takes in. Every cup makes the thirst worse. Men who broke and drank from the ocean rarely survived the night. Water could be found. Food could be raided. A clever captain with good charts and fair weather could manage both. But there was something else moving through the crew. Slow, invisible, and already weeks ahead of them. And no port, no prize, and no barrel of rum could stop it. August 1718. 8 months. The surgeon counts the sick. Half the crew cannot stand. This is where most pirate voyages ended. Not with a battle, but with a disease no one could name, scurvy. It killed more than 2 million sailors between the voyages of Columbus and the rise of the steam engine. Ship owners and naval commanders knew it was coming on every major voyage. They budgeted for a 50% death rate and called it the cost of doing business. In 1741, a naval ship lost its course due to a navigation error. The crew drifted for 3 months. 237 men out of 521 died of scurvy alone, and not one cannonball had been fired. It started small, sore joints, a tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. Then the gums began to bleed, teeth loosened and fell out, hair came out in clumps. The skin bruised at the lightest touch, dark patches spreading across the arms and legs like something rotting beneath the surface. And then the worst symptom, old wounds, scars that had healed years ago, reopened. Cuts from battles fought long before this voyage split apart and started bleeding again, as if the body had forgotten how to hold itself together. It had. Without vitamin C, the human body cannot produce collagen, the protein that binds tissue, skin, and blood vessels. The body was literally coming unstitched, and if you had been standing on that deck, watching your own scars reopen, you would have had no idea why, because here is the detail that made scurvy impossible to solve in 1718. The ship's cats and dogs ate the same rations as the crew, minus any fruit or vegetables, and stayed perfectly healthy. Unlike humans, most mammals can synthesize their own vitamin C. Doctors saw healthy animals eating the same food as dying men and concluded that diet could not be the cause. They were wrong, but vitamins would not be discovered for another 200 years. The cure was sitting in every Caribbean port they raided. Limes, oranges, fresh greens. A single lime, eaten daily, could reverse early scurvy within days. The bleeding gums would firm, the sores would close, the exhaustion would lift. But no one made the connection, not reliably, not yet. It would take a Scottish naval surgeon named James Lind, decades later, to prove what a piece of fruit could do. Scurvy killed slowly, infection killed fast, and when it came, there was one man aboard who could help, if the crew hadn't already kidnapped him.
Don't you worry now,
October 1718. A cannon splinter has shattered a man's forearm. The surgeon reaches for the saw. Surgeons were the most valuable men in the golden age of piracy, and they almost never volunteered. When a pirate crew captured a merchant ship, the first man they looked for wasn't the captain. It was the doctor. Surgeons were forced into pirate service so routinely that it became a recognized legal defense. Captured surgeons could argue in court that they had served under duress, and courts sometimes believed them. But having a surgeon didn't mean having medicine. His kit held lancets, forceps, a bone saw, and a triangular needle designed for closing skin after amputation. There was no anesthetic. Rum might be offered to dull the edge, but experienced surgeons sometimes refused. Alcohol thinned the blood and weakened the patient at the worst possible moment. The man bit leather and held on. Amputation was the only answer for a shattered limb or spreading gangrene. The saw cut through bone in under a minute. Speed mattered, because every second of shock brought the patient closer to death. Then the wound was sealed with hot tar or a red-hot iron pressed directly against the open flesh. The smell of burning skin filled the orlop deck. In 1718, a French surgeon named Jean-Louis Petit had just invented the screw tourniquet, which dramatically reduced deaths from blood loss. But most pirate surgeons had never heard of it. They used what they had, and what they had was fire. But losing a limb wasn't just a medical crisis. It was a financial event. The articles guaranteed compensation, and the crew paid from a communal fund before any other plunder was divided. A right arm was worth 800 pieces of 8, a left leg 500, an eye 100. If the man died, his share went to his family. Below deck, in the orlop, where the wounded lay waiting, the air was thick with the smell of rot, infection, and the sound of men trying not to scream. A man could survive the surgeon's table. He could survive the scurvy if he found the right port in time. He could even survive the water, but by the autumn of 1718, there was one threat closing in that no surgeon, no article, and no pirate code had ever been written to stop. The world had decided pirates were finished. November 1718. Woodes Rogers has held Nassau for 4 months. The Republic of Pirates is gone. The King's pardon had landed like a bomb. Hundreds of pirates accepted, walked off their ships, signed their names, and became free men overnight. Some of them genuinely retired. But others, like Benjamin Hornigold, one of the most feared captains in Nassau, took the pardon and immediately became pirate hunters, tracking the same men they had once sailed with. Those who refused the pardon were hunted down one by one. Charles Vane fled Nassau under fire, escaped through Rogers' blockade using a burning ship as cover, and ran. But in February 1719, a hurricane caught him in the Bay Islands. He was marooned, discovered, arrested, and hanged in Port Royal. Stede Bonnet, the gentleman pirate who had bought his own ship because he'd never stolen one, was captured at the Cape Fear River. Most of his crew were hanged in November 1718. Bonnet followed them to the gallows in December, and then there was Blackbeard, the most feared name in the Atlantic. 15 months as a pirate, that was all he'd managed. On November the 22nd, 1718, Lieutenant Robert Maynard found him at Ocracoke Inlet with 14 men and a single sloop. In the fight that followed, Blackbeard was stabbed 20 times and shot 5 times before he finally fell. The Royal Navy had grown from 2 warships in 1670 to 124 by 1718, fast frigates and heavily armed sloops, purpose-built for hunting pirates in shallow water. New Vice Admiralty courts meant no jury, no defense, and sentences handed down before midday. Between 1716 and 1726, 400 to 600 pirates were executed across the Atlantic. At Cape Coast Castle in 1722, 52 of Bartholomew Roberts's crew were hanged in a single morning, the largest mass execution of the entire Golden Age. The men who survived 1 year at sea in 1718 didn't just beat the food, the water, the disease, and the surgeon's table, they beat the calendar. Because the world they had built, the Republic, the Code, the Articles, the democracy on the water, was being dismantled from every direction at once. And the final irony, the pirates who lasted the longest weren't the ones who fought the hardest. They were the ones who took the pardon, burned their flags, and spent their remaining years hunting the men they had once called brothers. By December 1718, the gibbets in Nassau hold 9 bodies. The tide rolls in, the tide rolls out. The harbour that once sheltered 1,000 pirates is silent. A year at sea didn't kill most of them quickly. The sea was patient. It let the food rot. It let the water turn. It let the gums bleed and the scars reopen and the empire close in. The ones who survived didn't outfight it. They outlasted it, barely, and not for long. There is always another ship that never came home, and the next one is already on screen.